Unfortunately, once again, we have to raise an objection to the procedural grounds for presenting the authorization of 3 dangerous pesticides. Recently, an overwhelming majority of the European Parliament backed our objection and called for no further extensions to be granted for pesticides where it has been established that they pose threats to people, animals and the environment. And yet, just a few days later, along comes the Commission again with another procedural extension. In this instance, we're talking about an extra year for demoxystrobin amongst others, and Mancozeb. They say that they need the extension because the procedures to take a decision on approval have not been completed yet. Why not? According to the Dutch authorization authorities, in the case of Mancozeb, at least there's quite enough information available to EFSA to be able to take a decision right as of now. And it's extremely important that we actually do that because the current extension expires at the end of January, because Mancozeb is one of the most widely used fungicides in the European Union. And it makes people incurably ill. In countries such as the Netherlands and France, where this poison is widely used by farmers, there are strong indications that farmers and their families and neighbours are becoming ill as a result. It's not just neurotoxic. On top of that, the Risk Assessment Committee in ECHA have concluded that this is dangerous to advancing categories 1, A and B. In other words, it doesn't meet the requirements of the Commons Directive, so this poison must be banned as quickly as possible. It's completely irresponsible to expose people to this for a further year, and the same applies for demoxystrobin. In the Commission proposed 2015 regulation, it already established that this has a disruptive effect on people's hormone systems, so this extension is contrary to pesticide legislation. It's exposing people, animals and the environment to unacceptable risks. And it's necessary for the Commission this very month to come forward with proposals to ban these 2 dangerous substances. And it has every possibility to do this because there's quite enough scientific evidence for the ban. A further reason is that its own procedures with another dangerous pesticide show that that is possible. And I would like to ask the Commission about that, and I trust that everyone will back this objection. Thank you.
For the EPP.
Sehr geehrter Herr Vorsitzender, ich verstehe die Bewegung.
Thank you, Chairman. I understand why the objectors want to make sure that reprotoxic or carcinogenic substances be stopped. Of course, you have to look at all the factors and involve all those. So it's only on the basis of scientific basis can we make these decisions. This issue is extension of approval periods of active substances, 10 substances. And the control process is put in place to come up with a decision. That decision hasn't been taken yet. The legal situation here is very clear. The Commission is under obligation to make sure that the approval be extended if this process is not changed by the producers. So this is what we're looking at here. The delay is because of a slow production of the reports and evaluation of EFSA. That means that the decision on the 3, 6 or 12 months has to be made on the basis of the EFSA report. The support of this objection would constitute a completely arbitrary decision on a product. This would allow that active substances would not be able to be used in farming practices in the EU, and the farmers would be taken hostage by this situation where in some cases there aren't any substitutes available. Furthermore, some farmers would be put at a disadvantage in the EU vis-à-vis third country farmers. The European agriculture produces under very stringent conditions and produces the best food. This legislation, i.e. the objection, is bringing into question those standards. So I think we should reject this objection.
Jutta.
No. Okay. For Renew, Martin Osik.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is sadly another case where Commission has packaged together pesticides that are not a substantial problem with pesticides that are active substances that are a problem. And here again, it's about specifically two of them. And that's the mancozeb and I don't dare to pronounce that one, demoxystrobin, where I think the problem is that they really don't meet, and we already know they don't meet the cutoff criteria for authorization. And it somehow feels that on one hand, there is a pressure to keep them on the market as long as possible by extending the assessment. And on the other hand, I think the Commission should use the possibility to act just like it's finally doing and very well doing on the chlorpyrifos case. So I think this objection is not about all the active substances, it's about specifically two of them. And I think it's time that we really substitute the hazardous pesticides. Thank you.
Thank you. For ID, no speaker. For ECR, okay.
We are against the objections. I think that the predictability for the farmers, it's an important issue. It's just an extension, so we do not see that this objection is well established.
Okay, for the Greens as co-rapporteurs.
Ah, c'est bien, je peux faire la conclusion.
I prefer to conclude this. I'll be brief. I'm surprised by certain affirmation. Mancozeb and demoxystrobin are toxic for reproduction. They're known for being endocrine disruptors. The Commission has declassified these substances, but they're being authorized at the moment without any proper reason. Any reprotoxic substance shouldn't be authorized, and the authorizations of these types of substances should be limited in time. Given the risks recognized for human health and the environment, and these have been extended 3 times, this is not supporting citizens' health or biodiversities, and this has been put economic interests are going ahead of that. The Commission should withdraw these extensions of authorizations, at least for these 2 substances.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. I would like to give some comments on this draft motion for resolution. First of all, I would like to say that, in our view, we don't exceed the Commission's implementing powers with this measure. The measure follows a procedure set out in the Plant Protection Products Regulation, the Article 17 procedure, which requires that when a substance approval is likely to expire before its date, and this is beyond the control of the manufacturer, that then the Commission has to extend the approval. Recently, the European Ombudsman, in a case, has confirmed that the Commission has this obligation. So this is the case for all the 10 substances covered in the draft implementing regulation. It is important to note that this measure and this Article 17 procedure applies regardless of the classification of the substance. So it applies in all cases, whether a substance fulfills the cut-off criteria or not. So it means the classification does not establish grounds for us not to extend the approval period. Regrettably, there are delays in the procedure. They can occur, and they have occurred in the past. And this has had various reasons. Often, there is delays in the assessment by the rapporteur member states. But in these 2 cases, we had specific reasons. there was a parallel assessment of the hazard classification by the European Chemicals Agency. This is a procedure the Commission is using now more and more to avoid inconsistencies. So it is welcome that we have some consistency in classification stated by the European Chemicals Agency and later on a basis for the EFSA conclusions. This was the reason for delays in this case. Furthermore, some additional data were required that were needed following the implementation of the new criteria for the endocrine disruptors, which had to be collected and assessed. Now, in our legislation, of course, if approval or renewal is granted, the substance has to meet the criteria. It must be safe for consumers, for the environment, for animals. There will be a thorough assessment for these two substances of concern, for mancozeb and for dimoxystrobin. For mancozeb, we are already in an advanced stage with an EFSA conclusion that is finalized. A risk management decision still needs to be taken. This will be done as soon as possible. For dimoxystrobin, there is still some data on endocrine disruptor properties that need to be assessed. This is in the interest of consumers because it will help making an informed decision by EFSA and finally take a risk management decision on that basis. So the Commission appreciates that some of the additional information and the parallel proceedings has led to delays. But in order to protect the health of consumers, it is important that all information available is assessed and is taken into account. At this point in time, it is not yet clear what risk management decision will be taken for the two cases, but I would like to assure the honourable members that it will be based on science and it will be done in the spirit of protecting consumers, animals, and the environment.
Thank you. So again, the vote will take place tomorrow, and